Our next speaker from Americans for Prosperity, Mr. Ed Stiles.
Thank you. Good morning. Okay, Major Dave said something about the Army was following the Marines. Now it's time for the Air Force. I got to share something with you all, and this is actually something that I've been thinking a lot about. I've been acting as field director for Eastern North Carolina since probably about the middle part of January, but I'm also full-time field director for the Raleigh area as well. But all of you, and I've had a chance to talk to people in Goldsboro and Wilson and even places in Greenville and New Bern, and I got to tell you, y'all have made me feel so welcome and just so much a part of the family that is conservatives in Eastern North Carolina. And I'm happy to tell you that in a couple of months, my wife and I are going to be moving down here to live amongst y'all and to be full time. So that right there touches my heart. I got to tell you, I've come to love Eastern North Carolina, and the burden that I have for this area is great. And I'm looking forward to over time getting to know all of you. One thing I want to point out also is just kind of standing here and just taking in the beauty of this place. I was thinking back to a time when my father was in the Army, and we actually got a chance to take a trip to Berlin in Germany, and I actually saw the wall 7 months before it came down. And if they had told us in April of 1989 that wall was going to come down 7 months later, we would have looked at them and said they were crazy, because we couldn't have envisioned it. And thinking about the conditions that people behind the wall had to live in, I hope that we never have to. I hope it never gets to that point here. I pray to God that it doesn't. And right now, as I'm just looking around and taking in the beauty and the scenery and everything and the freedom that right here we're celebrating today. And it reminds me truly how blessed I personally feel, and certainly to be among y'all and to be here today. But one of the things I want to point out also about Americans for Prosperity is that we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse parties or candidates. We partner with other groups such as the CCTA, and I'm certainly glad, and I'm glad and honored to be here to talk to y'all today, to talk about our mission and our values and what we stand for and what we're going to be doing as an organization in the coming months, and why it is so important to keep and expand economic freedom in North Carolina and across the United States. And there's several reasons. There's the moral imperative, and then there's the practical reasons why economic freedom is a must. And I want to share those with you. Going back early into the 20th century, President Calvin Coolidge stated, and I quote, "I want the people to vote, or I want the people to work less for the government and more for themselves. I want them to have the reward of their industry. This is the basic meaning of freedom." President Coolidge understood both the practical benefit and the moral imperative of an economy where taxes, spending, and regulation are limited. After World War I, the income tax, now keep in mind today's the highest income tax rate, the federal income tax rate is 39.6 or something like that. After World War I, the highest tax rate was 73%. Now it got worse later, but that was the highest at that time, and it could be argued that triggered that helped to trigger and maybe even aggravate the post-war depression that lasted until 1922. But President Coolidge changed that. In 1924 and 1926, he signed two tax cuts that brought the top rate down to 25% and spurred economic growth during the 1920s. And not only did it spur economic growth, but it brought in enough revenue that President Coolidge could retire the debt that was amassed during World War I. And that's important to remember. President Kennedy also understood the value of lower taxes. In his speech to the Economic Club of New York in 1962, President Kennedy stated, and I quote, "It is a paradoxical truth that tax rates are too high and revenues are too low, and the soundest way to raise the revenues in the long run is to cut the rates now. Cutting taxes now is not to incur a budget deficit, but to achieve a more prosperous, expanding economy in which can bring a budget surplus." Fast forward to the 1980s, Ronald Reagan understood both the practical and the moral imperative of reining in taxing and regulating, and as well as spending. In a debate that he had during the 1980 primary season, he stated, and I quote, "Government doesn't get the money it needs; it always needs the money that it gets." You and I understand that means that talks about government's overbearing appetite to basically spend every dime that it takes in and then some, just to further justify taking more and more out of our pockets. We've heard about this all through the morning. We've heard about how this is being played out at the federal level. President Obama in 2009, along with a rubber-stamped Congress, passed multiple spending bills, including a $1 trillion stimulus bill that did nothing more than line the pockets of those interests that backed his election the year prior. Every year thereafter, he has made assertion after assertion that we, the people, are not paying enough, and even accuses a great many of us of not paying our fair share. He talks about fairness and equality. Now, I've got two questions. What exactly is fair about the top 50% paying the full freight of government and then continually being accused of greed and not paying their fair share? And furthermore, what is fair about small business owners and self-employed entrepreneurs? And I will tell you right now, I've been self-employed. My wife has been self-employed. So we understand this, and I know a lot of you have been as well. What exactly is fair about us having to shell out 25% of our gross income before we can pay one employee or purchase a single piece of equipment, and then have to pay an additional 35 cents out of what little profits we can eke out to support our families? And then we get castigated as greedy year in and year out every time we raise our hands and yell, "Stop." And that, on the other hand, there is good news. In states across the country, and we're seeing this and we're supporting these policies and supporting these efforts as they've happened across the states in the last few years, including here in North Carolina, where our governors and state legislators have recognized the perils of higher taxes that have wrought on their prospective economies. These leaders understand that governments are not the owners of the taxes that they take in. They are merely the stewards. Thank God there are some people who actually understand that. In places like Wisconsin, Ohio, and Texas, and yes, in North Carolina, pro-free market leaders have sought to bring their budgets into balance without raising taxes, and yes, even reducing tax burdens. Using our own home state of North Carolina as an example, the tax reforms put in place by the General Assembly have taken our state from being the 6th worst in business climate to the 17th best, and that's important to remember. As a result, also for the first time in a long time, our unemployment rate is now below the national average. That's important to remember as well. And one thing I want to point out, one thing I don't mind telling people is that I came over to AFP from being a legislative assistant in the General Assembly. I remember when, I don't know if they're still here or not, but Senator Sanderson and Representative Speciale, I was the legislative assistant when they first came into the legislature, and I remember in 2013 and early 2014, I worked on the fourth floor of the legislative office building, and I had to listen to those loudmouths every Monday. You know who I'm talking about, and I'm not going to mention any names because they do not deserve any special attention from us. But I will tell you right now, there are people like Senator Sanderson and Representative Speciale that stood strong even in the face of all that and the media onslaught, and they deserve our praise. Does this mean that we can relax when it comes to our governor and state legislators? Absolutely not. There's still more ground to be gained, and more importantly, we must be ever vigilant at not losing the ground that we've gained over the last few years. A prime example is how we as a state treat businesses who want to come into North Carolina. We can do it one of two ways. The smart way, of course, is to make sure that taxes are low for everybody. But there are some politicians, even sadly in both parties, that think that the best way to go about that is to offer bribes or special tax favors known as incentives. Well, one thing I can tell you that we understand, we at Americans for Prosperity understand that that is wrong, and we are fighting it every single day. Fortunately, there are counter proposals that would treat businesses and individuals equally. And by that I mean they all pay one rate. It doesn't matter level of income. That's what real equality is, and how our government treats us, not what's left in our pockets. In the Senate, there are proposals to further reduce corporate and individual income taxes ahead of the schedule set by the 2013 tax reform plan. While the plans have some provisions that we at AFP find questionable, by and large, on balance, these proposals are good, solid, pro-free market proposals that truly leaves more of the people's resources in the people's pockets where they belong. And again, it respects the fact that individual citizens are the owners of their resources, not government. There's something else I want to point out to y'all. There are things that all of us can do to ensure that we keep state government reined in, and then ultimately effectively rein in the federal government. And it's actually one thing I want to share with y'all. Back in January, a number of us, myself and two of my colleagues from North Carolina, took a trip to Tennessee. I want to tell you what was happening in Tennessee. Governor Jim Haslam was proposing Medicaid expansion in Tennessee. This was a Republican governor and Republican legislators, ladies and gentlemen, that were pushing for Medicaid expansion in Tennessee. And let me tell you something, AFP activists showed up in full force. We and the AFP activists occupied just about every single seat in those committee rooms in Nashville. And I'm happy to tell you that on the way home back to North Carolina, we got a phone call from the AFP state director telling us that Medicaid expansion had been defeated in Tennessee. We need to keep that up in North Carolina, my friends. From time to time, I will be calling upon you to help us to put pressure on our legislators to do the right thing on a variety of issues. And you've heard about certificate of need. That is one of our biggest priorities. That is one of our biggest priorities in North Carolina is CON reform. Also the next thing that is also on our high on our priority list is the sunsetting of the renewable portfolio standards that again plays favorites with different energy industries. You can help us to do this by communicating with your friends, your family, your neighbors, and encouraging them to do the same. As the current legislative session goes on, we will be doing phone banking and door-to-door campaigns, and I will be keeping you all abreast as to when we will be doing these and on what issues. Again, I want to invite you all to come up to our table. We've got a lot of good information in both what we're doing regarding issue advocacy, and also how we're going to be educating activists, as well as reaching out to people who may not necessarily have an interest in politics, but we can actually talk to them about how economic freedom benefits them in a non-political sense. So please come up here, and I'd personally love to meet you. We also have some phones and iPads up here. If you want to help us to do patch-through calls, there are some legislators that are wavering with respect to certificate of need, and we're currently undertaking a campaign to call into their districts and have them do patch-through calls to the legislative offices. So I'd love to meet you. I'd love to share with you what we got. So please come up here and talk to me. Again, thank you all so much for your hospitality, your time and attention. God bless North Carolina, God bless New Bern, and God bless America.
Again, Ed Stiles with Americans for Prosperity. Excellent group to be involved with.